How do social entrepreneurs and small businesses create an authentic brand people love so they can get the edge they need to stand out, create predictable revenue, and compete against the big guys? That's what we're here to discuss. I'm Adam Forrest, the founder of Change Creator, and this is the Authentic Brand Mastery Podcast. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back. We are going to be talking to somebody by the name of Kevin Manay. I don't know if it's Manay or Maney. He has written a regular column for Newsweek. He's been a contributor to Forbes, The Atlantic, Fast Company, ABC News, and all kinds of other media outlets. He was also a contributing editor at Condé Nast for their portfolio. For 22 years, he was a columnist and editor and reporter for USA Today. I think you get the idea. And that kind of leads into where he is today as the founding partner of Category Design Advisors. And we're going to talk about what category design is, because that's what he's helping CEOs with these days. Okay, so we're going to dive into that in just a little bit. Tons of good insights that we'll get through Kevin's experience. And this kind of, I was really interested because it's kind of related to the branding process, which obviously we're very big on here at Change Creator with our brand studio. And I love getting into these conversations because branding is just so important. So these fresh perspectives, especially coming from somebody with Kevin's experience, is going to be a lot of fun. If you missed the last episode, it was with Uyi Abraham. I always had a hard time with that name, but super cool dude, and he's got an incredible story. Okay, so he's from Nigeria, made it to the States. He runs now an 8-figure company. I'm sure you want to know how that happened and what it looks like. So a lot of good insights for any entrepreneur on their journey that you can get from that episode. We all have lots of internal obstacles. This is something that every entrepreneur deals with that holds us back because we're afraid to, take certain steps. It's easier to do what we know and feel good about, but the challenges, whether they're external or internal, are things that are, the path forward, basically. And a lot of people don't make it. Their dreams stay dreams, right? Because they're afraid to face the internal challenges and the external challenges. It's scary to invest and believe in yourself. It really is, right? What if it doesn't work out? Oh my God, the money and all the stuff. And, we hold ourselves back. But it's the people who see the challenge and acknowledge they can flip it on its head, and they're going to learn something from the challenge. They're going to become better because of the challenge. They're going to find the opportunity. This is something that Rockefeller was so good at. So anybody that knows Rockefeller and his story, as people panicked, he was calm. He saw the opportunity, and he practiced this throughout his whole career, which is what made him so good at everything that he did. And so when it comes to branding and design and all these things, it seems scary, but this is not the next webinar or workshop like BS. This is core business strategy and principles. You need a good brand if you want to position yourself right in the market, make people feel good, give them something to fall in love with. You want to get more sales, build trust, be an authority, build credibility. The brand strategy, the identity, the verbal, like everything comes together, and it's so important. All right, I don't want to hold us up too long here. Let's get into the interview. If you are interested in working with me directly on your brand and your website, all that kind of fun stuff, let's have that conversation. Just go to changecreator.com. You'll find our services there, and you can just fill out a quick little form and set up a calendar date, and we'll talk. That's it. There's no obligations. You can walk away from that conversation if you want to. It's up to you, all right? So anyway, let's dive into this conversation with Kevin and see what he has to say.
Okay, show me the heat.
I know you're going to dig this.
Kevin, welcome to the Change Creator Podcast. How you doing today, man?
Great, Adam. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you guys are doing some really interesting work, and you also just have some really interesting background that would be fun to kind of tackle and get into. And, as a guy in the branding space, I'm excited to hear more about the category work that you guys are doing with clients and why that's so important. I think there's going to be valuable insight for our audience there. So maybe what you could do is just tell us a little bit about what's exciting today, like what you got going on, and then the background of how you got there.
Sure. Well, what I have going on, which is also a little interesting to your audience, we're talking about a lot about the book Play Bigger, which came out 5 years ago. But I'm an author and journalist, and I continue to write and work. And I've had a long collaborative history now with Hemant Taneja, who runs General Catalyst, the big VC firm.
Yeah.
And he's really intent on trying to change the culture of Silicon Valley, all this move fast, break things, disrupt kind of stuff. And so we just finished a book. You're asking what is up lately. We just finished a book about responsible innovation.
Oh, cool.
And it's not just about what it is, but a playbook for founders. Like if you wanted to start a company and said, I really want to be that. I really want to do social good with a company, but I want to set up a business model that makes sure that happens, rather than like a business model that the first minute there's some pressure on profits, we're going to throw the social stuff out the window.
Yeah.
So what does that playbook look like? And that's the book I just finished, which is a nice add-on to the kind of work I've been doing for the last 5 or 7 years now.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Now, you did some journalistic work in the past. And so what did you get out of that experience, and how did it lead you to what you're doing today with category design?
Yeah.
And then when you tell me about that, just define what category design really means to people.
Will do. Well, I started out as a journalist, and I've been writing about technology and society for 30 years now.
Wow.
And, every major publication you can think of, and TV and all this stuff, and started writing books along the way. And one of the books I wrote was called Play Bigger. It came out in 2016. And I wrote it with these 3 other guys who were longtime technology industry, CEOs, company founders, company advisors.
Yeah.
A couple of them are longtime friends of mine too. And we got talking about this idea that especially in digital oriented spaces, it's pretty much always a winner take all in any one category. Okay. And there's a second place one that comes in, and gets maybe 20% of the market, and then everybody else gets the scraps. An easy example is Uber and Lyft, right? You've got this on-demand transportation category, and Uber has like 75% market share, Lyft maybe 20%, and then in most towns there's some other little guys that have 5% or something.
Yeah.
So if the part of the backward thinking here is that if that's true, then any company should want to be the category leader, because that's where all of the economics. Otherwise, you're just scraping for some market share from somebody else's category. So then the logic goes, if that's true, then if you're a company, you need to look out at the space that's out there. And not just say like, we built this cool thing and here's what it does, and you guys figure out what to do with it. That the idea is to look out at what's out there and understand what's missing, what problems need to be solved that aren't being solved by whatever else is out there right now, and find that space and define it for yourself so that you can create a new category and own it, rather than being in somebody else's category and trying to whittle away a little bit of market share. And it's better to start your own small category than to try to swim upstream in somebody else's big category and grow the category. Because if you grow the category, then you grow your business. Especially if you're the one who defines and dominates that category. So that's the thinking behind the book Play Bigger. Yeah. And then what we do in the book, which is what I guess people found so helpful and turned into an actual consulting and advisory business, is that the book very much lays out a playbook for how do you do that. If you want to think that way, you want to build company strategy around that, what are steps to take to see the market in the right way, to put some definition around that space so that you can own it and drive it first through the company and then through the market and through the public, to try to own the cat. So that's what the book does. And it's been we've sold 150,000 copies worldwide, and it's the best-selling book I've ever been a part of.
Yeah.
And as I would say, that then turned into a lot of CEOs and venture capitalists and all sorts of other people reading the book and calling us up and saying, "Help us do what you wrote about."
Let's do what you're talking about. Yeah.
And that's exactly what has become a big part of my job now. So I write books and I do that category design advisory stuff.
Pretty cool. Yeah. I mean, and that's funny how that works. When you do start putting your expertise out there, people will read it and they'll say, well, I'm not going to go look for someone else to do this idea. Can I just work with you?
Exactly.
Exactly. That works out nice.
Yeah.
Now, I would be curious about a little bit of the process. I haven't read the book yet, but you have my interest. And as a branding guy, we talk a lot about category ladders, and I think we're kind of on the same page of where to fit in. Because if you can't be on the top, like a couple, rings of that ladder, to your point, you just get the scraps, right? So, exactly. Can you tell us just a little bit about? Let's say you bring on a client, you're working with them. What is the process like? So how does that start off and what does it look like?
Yeah, great question. Well, we do, we one of the things we've come to learn and emphasize as we've tried to figure out how to turn this into a practice. Yeah. That the kinds of companies we work with generally are startups somewhere between Series A and IPO. Okay. And they don't have time. They don't have 6 months or a year or whatever to slog through a strategic plan and figure it out. Yeah. I mean, they got weeks. So we've come up with a program that's a really intense week, of workshops and us doing some behind the scenes work and pulling together the whole kind of category strategy in an intense week, and delivering it at the end of that, working hand in hand with the client's leadership team. So we're actually in a room with the client and and probably 6 or 8 people of the top leadership team, right? Or over a period of a few days, 6 hours a day, working through this together, because we believe that the company itself has all of the information they need in their heads. They just haven't gotten it out and know where to take it, and maybe need our help in how to get their heads up from the stuff they're working on and see the context and see where they fit in. And then we do hand holding on the back end as they start to roll that out. But the intense part is really just that week. So we like to say, well, we can get a company from zero to a category strategy, in a week, and then help them, carry it out in bits and pieces as the time goes on after that. Mm.
What are some of the key pieces of information that help navigate the decision-making process? At some point we have to look at it. And I think you mentioned a few things like, I don't know if you do like perception mapping and things like that, but you talked about kind of like narrowing it down but how do we start coming to some of these conclusions and getting clarity? So I'm just curious, we don't have to reveal all the secrets here, but we do want to get a little taste of, well, there's got to be some kind of like, and I'm sure it's in the book too, just decision-making process. Like, how do we start figuring out, getting rid of the noise and figuring out where we fit in? Just, can you give me a little sense of what that looks like?
Well, first of all, it's not so much where we fit in, it's what can we create? So interestingly, the whole thing starts with a really simple question that's really damn hard to answer. And the question is, what problem do you solve? Yeah. And you, it sounds so simple, but you would be amazed if you sit down with almost any company CEO and ask that question. The first thing they're going to tell you is, here's what our product does. Yeah. If you know what problem do you solve, and whose problem is it, and how do they really feel it in their gut, and why is it not being solved by anyone else? And if you're addressing something that's already being solved by someone else, then you're by definition entering somebody else's category. So let's redefine that problem. We believe that a category starts with either a an old problem that is just not being solved in a great way for people, or there's new ways to solve that problem. Or sometimes even better is defining a problem people didn't even know they had yet. And if you can, we can get, the first day of these workshops, which go like 6 hours with the leadership team in the room and whiteboards and everything else, most of the time, most of that day is just to talk about that problem until we get down to the very essence of what it is. Oh. And then if you can get down to the essence of defining a problem that isn't being solved adequately, or that you could actually tell people they have this problem, they didn't even realize it, then you've got the foundation to start building what does that category look like and how are we going to serve it.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. And I'm curious on how you've seen this play out for people that you worked with, where you go through this process. Is there, because let's say they have a problem that they didn't realize they had. Does this must have a pretty significant impact on their marketing strategy to educate then, because there's this level of then making people aware and education before they can really help solve that problem. So does that change that marketing strategy most times?
Oh, absolutely. Well, so one of the things we go into from the very start is that when you go through this category design thinking, it impacts everything about the company. So we want not only the head of marketing in the room, but we want the head of sales, and we want the head of product. Because once a company clearly sees that category, clearly sees that problem, it might affect the product they're actually building. The product team will go, oh, okay, well, we were kind of going in this direction, but if we turn it slightly in this direction and tweak things a little bit, we've solved a whole different category problem that we were after in the first place. So it does affect everything. I'll give you an example of a client, because they've been very proud of what of what they've done. We started working with a company called Noodle, Noodle.ai, and it was started by some very experienced people in the AI field, and they were poking at this sort of industrial AI idea and had a lot of different ideas. And this is also one of the things that happens at companies is you start with some ideas like this, and you have 5 or 6 or 8 people on your leadership team, and probably all those 5 or 6 or 8 have a slightly different idea of exactly where you're going. So alignment is always a bit of a problem. So through the conversation that we started to have, the problem that they identified that it has never really been able to be solved because you didn't have the AI to do it, was what we ended up calling flow operations in manufacturing. And the idea was that there's never been a way to really know from raw material to the shelf, everything that was going on in your manufacturing chain and supply chain, and ingest not only that, but alongside it, things like news reports, weather, all this other information going on, so that you could actually predict where you're going to have trouble getting this particular part, or what kind of problem in the manufacturing line was causing products to be defective. So if you could actually see the entire thing from raw material to shelf through the eyes of an AI that was understanding how everything moved and what was possibly going to go wrong, you could drive towards this idea of perfect flow in a manufacturing line. Now, when you say that to somebody who is a manufacturer, they go, of course that I would love. I mean, I have all sorts of problems in what you just described, and I would love to solve it. And what the message is that nobody thought you could solve that before because the technology didn't exist to do it. But now with this, what we ended up calling flow operations AI, you can actually solve that problem. You didn't even think this was a big problem you didn't even think you could solve, and we're going to educate. And they turn their entire their website, their marketing campaigns, everything turned towards this idea of educating people that this kind of idea of flow operations or perfect flow in manufacturing is actually something that's achievable, that's worth trying to achieve through the use of this kind of technology, AI-based technology. So that was an example of a company that, once they really understood what the problem was that they could solve, and how to articulate it, then their next step was to go out to the market and make it understand that this is a new category that can and will exist.
Interesting. And how are people like that? I mean, how are they in a space running a business? And you said you work with people Series A to IPO, so they've been in the game for a while, they're experienced. How is it that they have a business they're running, but they're not clear on the problem that they're actually solving? Or is it that they define the problem just incorrectly?
It could be some of both, or either. It's a couple of things happen. One is that a number of times, I would say, a company has come to us that has, maybe they're 3 years old, and the company was started out to build this particular thing and address this particular market, and actually succeeded and did that.
Right.
And now they're at a what next place. Like, we've built this foundation, but like, to take this from 0 to 10 was one thing, to take it from 10 to 1,000 is the next. So seeing what that larger purpose is, that bigger category. And by that point in time, by the way, 3 years in, and by that point in time, the company's been around long enough and has done enough that probably every person at the table does have a different idea of where you go next. So part of the process of this category design, and the reason for doing it with that whole team in the room, so that by the end of it, everybody there feels like they own it and they're all aligned around the same thing.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And I mean, it sounds like, when you put this together, it sounds like you have different, because you mentioned the stages, and I think that makes sense. So if you're working with people, they got into a certain level of success with their business, but I guess things evolve. So you're kind of like helping them through almost a transitional phase as well, basically.
Yep. And then, like, we worked with and I know they're also proud of the work that they ended up doing with us, a company called Sprinkler, which went public just a month or so ago. And Sprinkler had been around for 10 years. And they, they create these platforms, and I'm sure you've, as a marketer, you're familiar with some of them, that do all this, social listening and try to understand, where your reputation is going and everything like that. But there's 5 or 6 pieces to how that all works, and being able to see different kinds of different technologies. No one has actually unified them all together. Before Sprinkler, you could buy like spot solutions to a whole bunch of these different ways of listening or whatever. But anyway, so Sprinkler had been successful with that kind of technology over the past decade or so, but they were looking at an IPO, some few months out, and they realized that they didn't have a way to describe and go to market with what they were doing, because they kept seeing it in all these different pieces. And instead it looked like they were going to go out with an IPO and say that, well, we're competing against this person over here and this person over there, this person over here, with all these different pieces of technology. There was no single message and no single category that they could say, this is what we're going to occupy. Yeah. And as we talked through all of that, this was really one of those situations where the company knew everything it needed to know. It really just took an outside person to stand back and say, well, let's put it all on the table and see, does it all add up to something? And does it add up something that's new and different, rather than something that just is in somebody else's category? Right. And how do we define that? And that other set of eyes that we brought to that ended up giving them a category, and they went out with called Unified CXM, Customer Experience Management, Unified CXM. So what they went out with in their S1, and had a pretty successful IPO out of it. So it gave them a way to talk about the category that they were creating. So it's, so people come to us for all sorts of very different reasons.
Yeah, different capacities. That is interesting. And then the last example makes a lot of sense, because if you have a lot of different moving parts like that, that is tough to talk about if you don't have a unified like category or terminology to speak around it. Now, do you feel that for any company out there, tech or not, right? It could be food and beverage, whatever, that when you go through this process, that there's always a way to create a category?
Well, there is, but sometimes it takes a lot of discussion to see what that is, and we do. I mean, we will sit down with clients and say like, going in one direction, and then we'll talk about it. Say like, are you so? But wait, you're starting to talk about, well, we do this, better or faster or whatever. Well, if you're talking about better or faster or something, I think you're actually talking about you're going to somebody else's category and trying to say that somebody should use you instead of them, rather than saying we are different. We are something completely different from that. We do this thing over here, and
right,
and force a choice, not a comparison. So those are some aspects of thinking. And by the way, I know you have a lot of social interpreters that listen to your podcast.
Yeah.
And one of the things we've discovered, I mean, this applies. It applies to social interpreterism. It can apply to even the way you think about your personal, brand and work and journey.
Sure.
You really, it's the way to stand out and be seen and be understood is to have a very clear definition of what you're doing and where you're going, and be different from others. And that's sort of what we drive towards.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it sounds like you're kind of like playing a role, and it's like not in between worlds. I don't know how else to say it, but like I do robust brand audits and brand strategy work with clients, and you are really dialing into an important part of that process, which is professionally defining a unique category that they can really own and stand out in, so that to your point, I don't know if you're familiar with the red ocean, blue ocean, but you're not fighting in that red ocean as much.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Which I love, because it is, that is a very difficult process. It's something that can take a fair amount of time and energy and that outside perspective. So I think, when I hear everything that you're saying, it makes complete sense. And there's, I guess, a lot of ways to navigate those things, but the examples you mentioned at first, I was like, I'm not sure where this really goes. What kind of clients are like, diving in just for this? But as you mentioned, the examples, it's a much more clear picture. So it makes a lot of sense, and it's interesting. So now, how long is category design? How long have you been running that shop now? Is this pretty fresh or?
Well, it's been pretty much since soon after the book came out, because it really didn't take much time before the calls started coming in. So I'd say 4 to 4.5 years at this point. We've worked with probably some 40 companies by now in one way or another.
Okay, so you've been doing quite a bit.
Some of them, very intense short gigs. Some of them a little longer, but. I wanted to bring to go back to an earlier question of yours and bring something back around. One thing that does help actually is that I bring to this the mindset of a journalist, but everything I've learned in my journalism career is extremely helpful in this, because it's really about asking questions and listening hard to what people are saying, and understanding that there's often something behind what they're saying that's not exactly what they're saying. And trying to get at that. So the listening skills that I learned over those years are one thing, but the other half of it is that a big part of the output that we create is we essentially write this like 1,000-word narrative that tells the story of that category, and the purpose of that narrative is to put some, real hard words around what that category is and why it matters, and how you as the company are going to solve it, so that you have this sort of manifesto that everybody in the company can see and understand exactly what the strategy is and where you're going.
Yep.
And told in that sort of narrative style, because as I'm sure extremely well, is that the human mind loves narratives, and if you do it that way, it's much more understandable than some spiel that's like a typical press release that just throws everything at you, right? So that's a big part of what we do.
I like that differentiation. That brings a lot to the table for people, especially just because it demonstrates a new idea in a way that they can clearly understand and see. And I think you can hand it off to anybody so they can grab it and understand it pretty quickly. Yep. We're big fans of storytelling over here, obviously. So when I hear stuff like that, I think it's really smart to do. And it makes me curious on what those are like. Is that coming from like what kind of perspective is that written in, just out of curiosity? And is it a present day story or a manifesto such as a future story?
Well, it's funny. I like to say that the plot, we call them POVs, by the way. I mean, I know it's a fairly common term, but that's what we call them too. So we I like to say that our POVs follow the plot of every superhero movie you've ever seen. and so if you think about like a Batman movie, right? Like, it starts out with the Joker has shown up in town and things are terrible, right? Things are a mess and chaos, whatever. And you see, like the movie takes some time to show you just how bad it is, right? How bad the Joker is.
Yeah.
And so like that we start the narrative with what we call the dark side first, which is really wallowing in like, why does this problem exist and how bad is it and how does it affect people's lives that it's not being solved and why wasn't it solved before? Maybe we it takes 300, 400 words to tell that story and just really like feel how awful it is, right? Yeah. And then like, if think about that Batman movie, then what happens is you get introduced to Batman. and you probably get some lesson on like what Batman's powers are or why why Batman's uniquely suited to solve this problem of the Joker. First part of the POV is like the dark side. The Joker shows up. Then we introduce the category, which is Batman. The hero shows up to solve this problem. And the back half of the POV tells the story of how that hero solves the problem, what the superpowers are that solves that problem, and then how the world is better when that problem is defeated. Yeah, and only at the very end, and through that whole section of that POV, we're not mentioning the company's name once. It's all about the problem that exists in the world, why it needs to be solved, how it gets solved in a new way that never was possible before. And then at the very end, you drop in, we are X, and we're the ones that are going to do this.
I love it.
And so that's the plot.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, it's a great way to express the work that you're doing. And I always think about, the problem and the situation and the solution, kind of these elements that you're talking about. And if you have this person with their day in the life or whoever's problem you're solving, right, that customer, just how many real touch points do you have in their life that are going to be kind of making that connection and making their life better, right? I used to do pitches at WebMD, and we would have like a journey map of the person and their life. And then we would show the solution and how all the different touch points can help them. Mm-hmm. So storytelling in different capacities and stuff, but I love the idea of the manifesto, and I know the power of clarity it can bring to those teams. So I guess you obviously have found a lot of value it has brought to the teams you work with.
Yeah. Yeah. And then what we always tell companies is that, look, I mean, that's probably that thing we end up writing together is probably your internal manifesto, your internal DNA. You're not really going to show it to the public, but it is going to inform the way you talk about everything.
Yes.
And so then we can help companies with how do you translate that POV into a marketing campaign, into a sales deck, into a deck for investors, if that's what you're after at that particular time.
Right.
How do you help the product team thinking about, okay, well, now that we have this, new North Star about what we're going after, how do you help the product team, for instance, say no to things that are not in that same direction, and instead build the thing that's going to solve that problem, and that's all what happens on the back end of doing this work.
Awesome. I love it. Well, listen, I want people to be able to kind of check out what you're doing, and they can obviously check out the book that you have. When's the new one coming out that you just mentioned earlier?
New one's coming out in January. The title of it is Intended Consequences. It'll be published by McGraw-Hill in January this coming year.
Okay. And the other one was Play Bigger, right?
Play Bigger. Yep.
So you guys can check out these two books. Obviously, one's coming down the pipeline. The other one has been available for a while. You can check out the ideas in more depth, I assume, that we've been talking about here today. Really important stuff. So I think the work you're doing is extremely important. So people listening to learn those ideas and start understanding what it means to your business is very valuable. Where can people learn more about what you're doing and connect with you?
Well, come check out the firm's site, which is categorydesignadvisors.com. And I have a personal site, just kevinmaney.com, that has the past other books that I've done and other work I've done, if you're interested in that.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Adam. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning into the Authentic Brand Mastery podcast. Don't forget to stop by changecreator.com for more information, fresh articles, content, and our services if you're looking to build a brand that people love. And please stop by iTunes, leave us a 5-star review. We appreciate your support.